and on important issues like education, taxes, and crime. As the clock ticks down to November 6th, the stakes are high. How will the candidates set themselves apart? You are about to find out.
Broadcasting across the state from your local election headquarters, this is the Kansas Governor Debate, live from Wichita, Kansas.
We are live from the KSNW studios in Wichita, Kansas. Welcome to tonight's Kansas Governor Debate. Good evening, I'm Jeff Herndon, anchor at KSN News 3 in Wichita. You can follow the debate tonight on social media using the hashtag KSGovDebate. This is the final televised governor debate that is being broadcast statewide, and that includes our next door stations covering Kansas. KSN here in Wichita and across western Kansas. KSNT covering Topeka, and KSNF in southeast Kansas. We are also being seen on KMCI The Spot, broadcasting to the Kansas City region. I want to introduce the three candidates tonight. They were invited to participate in this debate because they met the criteria set forth by our corporate ownership Nextdoor Media Group. You can find that criteria on our websites. We begin with Greg Orman, running as an independent in this race. He is a businessman and founder of the Common Sense Coalition for Change. He started his first business in 1992 after graduating Princeton. He is married and has 2 daughters. Also joining us is Kris Kobach. He is a Republican. He is our current Secretary of State, elected in 2010, a graduate of Harvard, Oxford, and Yale. He has worked as an advisor to now President Donald Trump's campaign. He is married and has 5 daughters. Also joining us is Lori Kelly. She is a Democrat. She is a state senator, first elected in 2004. Prior to that, she was the executive director for the nonprofit Kansas Recreation and Parks Association, a graduate of Bradley and Indiana universities. She is married and has 2 daughters. I'm joined tonight by my colleagues from our sister stations. Jessica Schaer is an anchor at KSNF TV covering southeast Kansas, and Dr. Bob Beatty, a political analyst for KSNT TV in Topeka. We will be co-moderating the debate tonight. Now, before we begin, let's go over the rules tonight. There will be no opening statements. Candidates will be given 60 seconds to answer each question. At the end of 60 seconds, we will ring a bell to sound when time is up, and we will be keeping each candidate at their time. At the moderator's discretion, follow-ups or rebuttals will be allowed. Those will be limited to 30 seconds. The order on the stage and the order of initial questions were determined with a random draw 5 days ago and communicated to each candidate. Each candidate will receive 30 seconds for a closing statement. They will go in the order of the first question that was determined by that random draw. The questions you are about to hear were not made available to the candidates prior to this debate. With that, let's begin. Jessica Schaer, you have the first question tonight.
Jeff, thank you so much, and welcome to our 3 candidates this evening. Now, although Jeff Collier is our current governor, this race really is to determine who will succeed Sam Brownback. When Brownback left office, a Morning Consult poll showed he had an approval rating of 24%, the 3rd lowest in the country when he left office. Now, we're going to begin this debate a little bit differently, and I need each of you to participate. Raise your hand if you think Sam Brownback was a good governor. Thank you. Thank you. So, Mr. Orman, we'll begin with you. You did not raise your hand. Why?
Well, you know, I think if you look at what Governor Brownback did, he clearly embarked on a reckless tax experiment that ultimately brought the state to a very difficult spot financially. I think his biggest issue, however, was when it was clear that his experiment wasn't working, he didn't change course. You know, I've spent my life in the private sector. For 27 years, I've grown, built, and improved companies. I'm the only person on this stage to run organizations of the size and the scale of many of our state agencies, and Governor Brownback just frankly didn't do what we would do in the private sector, which is when it's clear that your plan isn't working, ultimately you have to change course. And so his mistake, and it's a mistake that lots of partisans make, is they cling to rigid ideologies when ultimately they need to be improving their decisions as evidence presents itself. You know, again, I'm the only candidate on this stage who has any experience running companies, and it was one of the issues that Sam Brownback had as well.
Secretary Kobach, you did raise your hand. Why is that?
Yeah, I raised my hand. Governor Brownback had a mixed record. He did well in protecting the lives of the unborn, and I think he deserves credit for that. He also tried to address our water problem that is affecting agriculture, and he also tried to stand for the rights of all Kansans to keep and bear arms. Where he failed, however, was when taxes were cut, and they needed to be cut, he didn't cut spending. Instead, spending skyrocketed right after the taxes were cut in 2012, and that caused the deficits. I understand that you don't put the cart before the horse. I am the only candidate on this stage who believes Kansans are overtaxed and we need tax cuts. But I will cut government spending at the same time or before we cut those taxes. I've shown it can be done. In my own agency, I cut spending from $7.0 million a year down to $4.6 million a year, saving Kansas taxpayers over $10 million. It can be done. I have the experience to do it. And when we cut government spending, then we can return that money to the taxpayer. That was the mistake of the Brownback administration. They didn't cut spending, and then when the time finally came for a tax hike to be proposed, he actually accepted a sales tax hike.
Senator Kelly?
Yeah, there is no doubt that Sam Brownback ramrodded policies through the state legislature and inflicted them upon our state, decimating our schools, our roads, our health care, and our economy. We need to change that. We have started down the road to recovery, and we need to stay on that road. Kris Kobach has vowed to go back to the Sam Brownback experiment. We know what that did to us, and we don't need to go back there. The other thing that Sam Brownback left us with was a reputational deficit. You know, it has been very difficult to attract businesses, professionals, millennials to come to this state, and it's been very difficult to keep people here. We've had the greatest out-migration of any of our surrounding states during the Brownback administration.
We offer 30 seconds for rebuttal. Secretary Kobach, did you want to rebut?
Yes, I'd like to rebut that. Senator Kelly has been running against Sam Brownback this whole race. Indeed, her ads constantly try to tie me to Brownback. But look at three critical issues. Sales taxes. Brownback hiked sales tax in 2015. She wanted an even bigger sales tax hike. Government spending. As I said, he made the mistake of increasing government spending. She wants even more of it. And on illegal immigration, Sam Brownback had no appetite for addressing our illegal immigration problem. Neither does Laura Kelly. So my question is, will the real Sam Brownback please stand up?
Senator Kelly, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I think we all know that Kris's comparing me to Sam Brownback is absurd on the face of it. I actually voted against the sales tax increase that Brownback proposed because of what it would do to our citizens across the state, including making our sales tax on food the highest in the country.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. Current polls indicate none of you has a majority supporting you in this election. A public policy poll shows a 41-41, 10% split with 6% of voters undecided, and a Remington research poll shows nearly the same thing. So one of you will be elected without 50% of the vote. So if you're elected, how specifically will you lead a state where the majority of the citizens didn't vote for you? So we're going to rotate our answers now, and we start with Kris Kobach.
Well, I've shown that I can reach across the aisle and gain broad bipartisan consensus. When I proposed and promised that Kansas would become the #1 state in America in stopping voter fraud, I delivered on my promise, and that included photo ID, proof of citizenship, and eventually prosecuting election fraud. On the photo ID and proof of citizenship, my bill had the support of more than 2/3 of Democrats, including Senator Kelly, who voted for it in the legislature. So I've shown that I can reach across the aisle and make the case for the policies that we need in Kansas. And I'll be making the case that our taxes are way too high. We're the highest tax state in the 5-state area. And I can make the case, I believe, to Democrats that we've got to give relief to hardworking Kansans. I think on the issue of illegal immigration, it doesn't make sense to give $377 million a year in welfare benefits and other public benefits to illegal aliens, something Laura Kelly voted for, when our own Kansas families are having trouble making ends meet. If we've got so much money to give to the illegal aliens, why in the world are we not looking after Kansas families?
Senator Kelly?
Yeah, Kris loves to say that I voted for his voter ID bill. Actually, I did not. I voted for a compromise bill so that he would not get all the authority that he wanted to be able to suppress voters. And when it was clear that he was abusing his position, I co-sponsored a bill to repeal the voter ID provision. So with that, I think it's very clear as we've gone on in this campaign that I will be able to bring people together. I have always done that in my Senate career. It's clear from the support that I've gotten across the board with moderate Republicans as prominent as Governor Bill Graves, Governor Mike Hayden, U.S. Senator Nancy Kassenbaum, U.S. Senator Sheila Fromm, that I am the one who can bring people together, work on behalf of the state of Kansas, and fix this mess.
Greg Orman.
You know, I think that's one of the real advantages of being an independent. I don't particularly care who the author of an idea is. I care whether or not it's a good idea. And so as an independent, I can work with both sides. You know, this is an area where I think both Secretary Kobach and Senator Kelly are going to have an awfully hard time getting anything done in Topeka. Secretary Kobach's talking about going back to the failed Brownback tax experiment. The people of Kansas slammed the door on that in 2016. They are not going to allow the legislature to vote to go back to Brownback's experiment. Senator Kelly, on the other hand, is going to have to deal with a very conservative legislature who's going to have a clear incentive to make sure she's not successful, because they're not going to want that lorded over them in the 2020 elections. I'm the only candidate here who can move the state of Kansas forward. I think between Secretary Kobach and Senator Kelly, we're frankly just debating the slope of the decline curve.
Secretary Kobach, I know you wanted to respond, but it is unusual to have former Republican governors endorse someone from another party. So would you like to address that?
It's not unusual in Kansas. We've seen that happen year after year. And the most recent case was Governor Hayden, who's pro-choice and was thrown out of office because he was hiking taxes too much on property taxes. So it was a Democrat who went to his right. But I want to address what Laura Kelly said. She said she changed position on photo ID. She voted initially for my bill, which was a compromise bill, and she also changed her position on guns. She used to have a decent grade from the NRA. Now she's got an F, a horrible grade. In both cases, she changed her position so she could run for this office. One thing you know about me, I don't change my position. I'll do what I say I'm going to do.
Senator Kelly?
Again, I'd say that's nonsense. I actually changed my position on guns, though I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, but it was 2 years ago that I voted to ban guns on college campuses as a direct result of requests from my constituents. So it was long before I gave any consideration for running for this office. I changed because it was the right thing to do, and if Sam Brownback had changed when he realized he had made a mistake, Kansas would be in much better shape today.
Greg Orman, 30 seconds.
Well, here's where I agree with Secretary Kobach. I mean, Senator Kelly, you flip-flopped on that position precisely for the reason Secretary Kobach said. You wanted to get elected governor. You realized the political winds had changed. So, and let's also be clear, you didn't just vote for the constitutional carry amendment, you co-sponsored it. And then as someone who claims to be the education governor, to say you changed your mind because a professor told you they'd be troubled by a student carrying a concealed weapon into their class, that just doesn't pass the smell test.
All
right, candidates, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about taxes now. You have all said during your campaigns at some point that you would like to cut taxes in some form, either income, property, or sales tax. But when Governor Brownback's tax cuts went into effect, it led to a $700 million budget shortfall with cuts to education, road projects, and Medicaid, and an increase in tobacco and alcohol taxes. Given that education, health, and transportation make up the vast majority of the state's spending, where specifically are you going to cover the tax cuts? We'll begin with Senator Kelly.
Okay, well, I actually led the bipartisan effort last year to essentially repeal the Brownback tax experiment. And by doing that, we've put ourselves back on the road to recovery. We've had 16 months now of revenues exceeding estimates. So we have a cushion in our bank account now. We can go back into the legislature next session and we can fund the essentials of government, particularly our schools, which we do need to add a little bit more money to that. That money is in the bank, and we will do that. And then we will focus on the priorities of this state and bring back the things that made Kansas what it was, and also allows for economic development. So we'll be funding the schools. We're going to look at a way for funding transportation and other infrastructure projects, and we will expand Medicaid.
Mr. Orman.
You know, the reality is where we are right now, after we meet the Supreme Court's mandate on education, we're not going to have much money left over to do much of anything. I'd love to be able to stand here and tell you that I'm going to cut all sorts of taxes, but the reality is if we want to invest in our priorities, if we want to be able to grow the Kansas economy, to create the jobs and opportunities that keep our kids here, we're going to have stable tax policy for a little while. I'm the only candidate on the stage who's ever really created meaningful jobs. I've created them right here in Kansas. I want to focus on growing the Kansas economy. I've got a detailed plan to do that on my website, ormanforkansas.com. I want to make government more efficient so that we can invest in our priorities without having to raise your taxes. Ultimately, I do believe we will get to the point where we can start to see some relief in the area of sales tax on food and on property tax. But I think we have to be realistic. It's going to take us a little while.
Secretary Kobach.
Laura Kelly in the last 9 years has voted for 4 different tax hikes, 2 sales tax hikes and 2 income tax hikes. She's never met a tax hike she doesn't like. And for her to claim that somehow she's going to maybe consider cutting taxes in the future after she massively expands government spending is laughable. Look, I've shown that we have the room to cut taxes if you use natural attrition. That's what I did in my agency. As the baby boomers retire, and they're retiring at the rate of 11,000 a day nationally, you can allow people to leave government and not fill all the positions. That's how I shrunk my agency by 18%, and we cut our spending by 34%. I'll do that across the board in Kansas government through natural attrition and then return the money to taxpayers. In addition, I will put a 2% cap on property tax appraisal hikes. People are getting taxed out of their homes right now. People who intended to retire in their homes are suddenly finding, hey, these property taxes are going up through stealth tax hikes where the appraiser raises my value 15%, 20%, 25% in a single year. I will get that done. We have to look out for the Kansas taxpayer.
Okay.
Senator Kelly, would you have a rebuttal to that?
I do. You know, I'm actually the only one standing on this stage tonight who understands the Kansas budget. I have been the ranking minority member on the Senate Ways and Means Committee for 14 years. I have an intimate knowledge of that budget, and I can tell you that the budget at this point is stable enough and moving towards even greater stability that we will be able to fund education and restore some of the funding to programs like foster care without raising taxes.
That'd be great if that were all Senator Kelly is talking about spending money on, but she's talking about spending money on a whole lot of other things. Look, I also think Secretary Kobach's idea of just doing this through attrition is sort of lazy. We've got to look at the state government. We've got to say, what are the programs that are working? Spend more money on those. What are the programs that aren't working? And we've got to eliminate them. We've got to do what we would do in the private sector, which is invest in those things that work and eliminate those programs that aren't working.
Kobach?
Well, I'll be doing much more than just cutting government through natural attrition. We'll also be cutting government by looking at wasteful expenditures and programs. There was a study done a couple of years ago in the legislature. It's called the A&M study, which refers to the company that did it. They gave about 75 recommendations to the legislature about how they could save money. You know how many they've implemented? Fewer than 25. I'll be taking those recommendations and implementing those as well to cut our spending in our government right now. The taxpayers of Kansas cannot afford it. And for Laura Kelly to say we're going to be increasing all of these programs and then maybe we'll look at a tax cut is ridiculous.
Okay, candidates, we need to move on. Now, there have been many criticisms of the Department for Children and Families, or DCF, in recent years. One well-known case, the murder of 3-year-old Evan Brewer. Multiple reports were made to DCF in the months before the boy's body was found encased in concrete. The DCF Wichita office later admitted someone altered documents related to that case. A report later revealed DCF as an agency has missed more than half of its standards for child welfare. The agency has made reforms, including releasing more documents in child deaths and appointing a new secretary. So we will go to each of you. Do you think reforms with DCF have gone far enough? And if not, what would you like to see specifically change the way that the department is operating? We'll start with you, Mr. Orman.
Well, you know, DCF is clearly an embarrassment, and anybody who's been involved with this has to be concerned about it. I mean, the reality is we've lost 75 kids in foster care. We have a record number of kids getting taken by DCF, and at the same time, we're leaving kids like Evan Brewer, who should have been taken out of the home, into the home. It's an embarrassment, but it's also one of the things that happens when you have partisan governors. You end up appointing partisan agency heads. It's one of the benefits of being an independent. I don't need to pick my appointments from a group of politically loyal Democrats or politically loyal Republicans. I can pick the best and the brightest people to serve the state of Kansas, and that's exactly what we'll do at DCF. The other thing we have to do at DCF is put in place citizen advocates. I mean, I can't think of anything worse than having your children taken away from you and having no redress. That's why we put out a transparency, effectiveness, and accountability plan that includes adding citizen advocates at DCF.
Secretary Kobach.
No, the changes at DCF have not gone far enough, and if I am governor, we will overhaul that agency. Did you know that approximately 70% of the prisoners in the Kansas prison system were in foster care at one point in their lives? And it's true, as Greg said, 75 children were lost from the system. Now, in most cases, what happened is those people were foster children who ran away from the homes and then didn't check in and tell the government where they were going. But did you know this? Most of them were teenage girls, and there is a high risk that some of them may have fallen into sex trafficking. This is a big problem. I am looking at this agency already, and one of the solutions to the problem is going to be this. Many of the kids feel there's nobody they can call at the state DCF agency to answer their questions when they're in trouble. Indeed, they are passed from committee to committee, from bureaucrat to bureaucrat. When I'm governor, each foster child will have one person who stays with him or her all throughout their childhood. So whenever there's any problem at any foster family, foster home, they can call that person and know that there is somebody looking out for them. That's what we've got to think about. On a human level, somebody looking out for them.
Senator Kelly.
Yeah, I'm actually the one who blew the whistle on DCF and it's losing children in the foster care system. I was sitting on a child welfare task force and uncovered that fact and let it be known publicly that that was there. And that's the reason that we have a new secretary of DCF. That agency has been decimated by the Brownback tax experiment. They don't have social workers at the front end to do family preservation and keep kids out of the system. They don't have social workers at the back end to do reintegration either into the biological home or into an adoptive home. We have got to give them the resources that they need to take care of our kids. I will treat this issue as the emergency that it is. This is a life and death issue, as we've seen.
All right, candidates, for timing purposes, we want to move on and get a few more questions in before the break. I want to ask you now about some issues that are impacting Kansas. Some of these issues have made headlines very recently. With that, I'll turn it over to Jessica Schaer.
Jeff, thank you. Are you for or against legal marijuana? And in what capacity? Secretary Kobach, we'll start with you.
I am opposed to legalizing marijuana in Kansas, certainly opposed to recreational marijuana legalization. And when it comes to medical marijuana, I don't think the time is right at this point. The FDA is about to approve, we believe, in pill form, CBD, which is the beneficial component of marijuana. I'd like to see if the individuals who believe that marijuana could help with their debilitating conditions can find equal treatment or better treatment in the CBD pill form. Let's use that first, because if we go and take the step to medical marijuana, we have found in every state that's tried it that there's always a doctor somewhere who will write a prescription for anybody, and that becomes a gateway into recreational marijuana. And so it's never been successfully restricted to those who are truly in medical need. So I would say let's let science advance. Let's see how CBD does in pill form and go from there.
Senator Kelly.
Yes, I do support the legalization of medical marijuana. You know, it has been clearly shown that it has many benefits for young children with severe seizure disorder, for folks in chronic pain, and for end-of-life use. It would also be incredibly helpful in helping to reduce the opioid crisis. Fewer opioids would be prescribed. Medical marijuana could be used instead. We'd have fewer opioids on the market. So I think it's imperative that we get this done. I believe the legislature is prepared to do that. I also think that we need to review our sentencing guidelines. We are incarcerating non-violent first offenders for minor marijuana possession. You know, we're destroying their families and we are costing the state a fortune. We need to design treatment programs, not incarceration for those kinds of folks.
Mr. Orman.
Well, this is an issue where I've been leading from the beginning. I absolutely believe we need to legalize medical marijuana, and it's not just CBD. There are many instances where you require both CBD and THC for it to be effective. A case in point, I traveled earlier this year to Colorado to meet a refugee family, a young man who actually was having up to 200 seizures a day and had to leave Kansas to get treatment. I'm happy to say that he's now been months without a seizure in Colorado using medical marijuana. This is a human issue, and it's absolutely essential we do it. We also see roughly 20% lower opioid addiction rates in states that have legalized medical marijuana. Ultimately, I don't see any reason why we aren't moving full steam ahead with this. As it relates to recreational use, I don't think we should be arresting, booking, confining, trying, and incarcerating young people for having recreational quantities of marijuana. I would treat it like a speeding ticket and send you on your way.
We're going to move to an issue that's been in the news over the past few years. Do you support transgender bathrooms in Kansas public schools? And we start with Senator Laura Kelly.
I do. And I can look no further than North Carolina. When North Carolina legislature banned transgender bathrooms, what happened was businesses that were packed up, ready to move to North Carolina said, never mind, we're not coming. Conventions canceled right and left. It had a huge economic impact on the state of North Carolina. They rescinded that bill. I don't think there's any reason for us to go down a path that's been proven to be a disaster economically for states. So we will not do that. I also think that it's the kind of discrimination that makes it very difficult for us to attract young people to our state. You know, they're not interested in discriminating against anybody, LGBT, for racial, for religious reasons. You know, they want a state that's open and welcoming, and that's what we need to make Kansas.
Greg Orman.
You know, I'm not sure we should be regulating how people use the bathroom. I mean, ultimately, if someone is going to commit a violent crime, they're going to commit a violent crime regardless of what our bathroom laws are. I believe that Kansas should be open and welcoming. I believe that Kansas should not discriminate against anybody for any reason. And I would never sign a law that would do that. And so, again, I just think we need to be an open, welcoming place. We need to encourage people to move to Kansas. We don't need to discourage them by passing laws that really have no practical effect and will ultimately end up hurting people.
Secretary Kobach.
Well, the two answers you've just heard illustrate the very liberal thinking of my two Democrat opponents. To suggest that people are going to move to Kansas because we have transgender bathrooms in our public schools is ridiculous. In fact, the biggest impediment to people moving to Kansas is that we tax them so much. But the idea that transgender bathrooms are going to cause families to up and move and come to Kansas is in fact false, and in fact the opposite might occur if we were to allow transgender bathrooms. I oppose transgender bathrooms in our public schools. I'm the father of 5 daughters, and we are increasingly getting to this politically correct thinking that a person can be a girl today and a boy tomorrow and then a girl the day after that. I don't want my girls going into a bathroom and then finding a boy in the bathroom because he's decided that that day he's a girl, and he's doing that as an excuse because he's really a sexual predator and he'd like to invade the privacy of my daughter. I don't think any parent who thinks seriously about this wants something like that to happen. There's an easy solution without going to transgender bathrooms, and that is let them use the faculty bathroom if they object to use one of the students' bathroom. Let them using a neutral bathroom. That's how you solve the problem.
Okay, candidates, thank you. You are watching the Kansas governor debate, and a reminder for you at home, you can follow this debate on social media using the hashtag KSGovDebate. We're going to take a short break. We will be back in 2 minutes.
When we come back, the candidates will take a look at the political ads that you've been seeing on air and online. We'll ask each candidate if they will stand behind their claims.
How can you spoil a rotting system? Some say I'm out of touch. My mother raised 6 kids alone, struggling to pay the bills. I remember. If there was another candidate with my
Your local election headquarters welcomes you back to the Kansas governor debate. We are broadcasting statewide from our studios here at KSNW TV in Wichita, Kansas. A reminder, you can follow this debate on social media using the hashtag KSGovDebate. Let's continue the debate now. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Bob Beatty.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Our viewers have seen a lot of your campaign ads, and I mean a lot of your campaign ads. We're going to ask each of you about an ad that was approved by you and ask you why you stand by this ad. We're going to ask you to look at the monitor to watch each ad, and we'll start with our random order with a portion of an ad from Greg Orman. So let's take a look at this ad.
I have one life to improve Kansas for our children, and so do you. Some say it's impossible to change this corrupt government. I ask why.
Now, Mr. Orman, within that ad, you use the words corrupt government. Specifically, where do you see instances of corruption in the Kansas state government, and do you stand by that ad?
Oh, I absolutely stand by that ad. I think if you look at everything going from no-bid contracts to the lack of transparency to the fact that we allow lobbyists to give money to candidates, all of that in my mind is corrupt. That's your government for sale. You know, 85% of Americans believe that Washington is a rigged game that only benefit those people who can buy access to power. The same is true in Kansas. And you know what? Americans are right. We have sold our government. It's one of the reasons I will not take money from PACs. I will not take money from lobbyists. I will not take money from parties or corporations. When I go to Topeka, I want to go there and serve solely and exclusively the people of Kansas.
We'll now go to Kris Kobach. Do you agree with Greg Orman's statement that the Kansas state government is corrupt?
I do. I agree with that statement. I've said from the beginning of my campaign that I will address the culture of corruption in Topeka. And that culture of corruption has multiple elements. One is the no-bid contracts that Greg mentioned. Another one is, though, that did you know there are votes taken in Kansas committees that are not recorded? So Senator Kelly can vote and not have any of her constituents or anyone know how she voted. It's only a voice vote, and you can only tell what the vote was if you were there in the committee. I also think we need term limits, and I'm the only candidate pushing for term limits in Kansas. The idea that there are only 125 people in our state who are qualified to serve in the House or 40 people in the Senate is ridiculous. We need new blood into the system. I would support not only term limits for the legislature, but for all executive officials, the Secretary of State's office, the Attorney General's office. There should be 8-year limits so that we can bring new blood into Kansas, and that can help stop the culture of corruption. New people coming in makes it hard for those buddy-buddy relationships to persist that are part of the culture of corruption.
Senator Kelly, do you agree with Greg Orman's statement that the government is corrupt?
I'm not sure I would use the term corrupt. I do think that there are things that need to be altered in the way that we operate as a state government. And I would go also to the no-bid contracts. You know, there are over 4,000 of those that have occurred during the Brownback administration where deals are cut in a back room, whether they're in the best interest of Kansans or not. As governor, I will review each and every one of those contracts to make sure that if we are going to outsource something, that we're getting the best bang for our buck for Kansas taxpayers. I think the other way that we can improve things is by changing the complexion of government. You know, over the past 8 years, so many people have been put into positions of authority for really ideological purposes rather than for any skill set that they brought to that. I will change that. My cabinet and my appointments will look like Kansas. They will be skilled, highly trained folks who know what they're doing and understand the mission of their agency.
We're going to ask you to look at the monitor again as we now play a segment of an ad from Kris Kobach. So let's take a look at that ad.
Kelly is just like Obama. She voted for energy regulations that increase Kansas electricity bills $600 per year.
Did you know that Kansas electricity bills are now 24% higher than in surrounding states?
Now, you may have noticed that within that ad, Secretary Kobach, you do not cite where these figures are coming from or explain how Kansans saw a $600 increase in energy bills. Tell us where the claims come from, and do you stand by that ad?
Yeah, I absolutely stand by the ad. The 24% higher than surrounding states is from the publicly available price we pay per kilowatt hour. And a lot of people don't realize this. Residential electricity in Kansas costs us on average 13.4 cents per kilowatt hour. If you average the 4 states surrounding us, it's only 10.9 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a big problem, both for us in balancing our pocketbooks and for businesses trying to decide whether to stay in Kansas or go somewhere else. And there are many businesses that are leaving for that reason. The bill that increased our electricity rates more than $600 per household, as has been later reviewed by policy organizations, was the bill that forced our power companies to diversify the types of power that they had, didn't let them do it as was affordable, and could be done in a way slowly to address so that it wouldn't increase the bills on consumers. And Laura Kelly voted for that. So we absolutely have to address high utility rates. I will do it, and I'm the only person on the stage who's talking about doing it.
Senator Kelly, you're referenced in that ad. Do you agree with it?
No, I don't agree with it, because what Kris
Sam
is talking
Brownback
about
school funding
is a bill that I voted for that told our utility companies that they needed to build their portfolio so that 20% of the electricity that they were offering was produced by renewable energy sources. Our utility companies have actually exceeded that mandate. Westar just announced that they were at 35%. So that's what that is. You know, the fact of the matter is the legislature does not set electrical rates. That's negotiated through the Kansas Corporation Commission. And I would agree that we need to take a really good look at the folks who are appointed to that commission and make sure that we have people there who have the consumer in mind as well as regulating the companies.
Greg Orman?
Well, you know, this is one of the unintended consequences of having people make policy who really don't have experience in the private sector. I've spent a lot of time in the utility business. I realize renewable energy could be a boom for the state of Kansas. But we have to do more than just say to our utilities, build all of this energy resource or else. We have to build demand for it. That's why I've developed a detailed economic development plan that's on my website, ormanforkansas.com, that among other things talks about how we build demand for renewable energy so that we can spread the cost of all that investment over more demand and ultimately reduce costs for our residences and for our businesses. And we've talked about three things. Number one, transmission lines into the West, into Colorado, so that we can export that energy. Number two, allowing our utilities to go beyond the pilot program they have right now and allow for renewable-only tariffs with their customers. And number three, evaluating how we can take advantage of the new electric semi-market.
Secretary Kobach, you have a rebuttal, but Senator Kelly said that, in fact, the legislature doesn't set utility rates, so maybe you might address that as well.
Right. They don't set utility rates, but the bill that she voted for forced the utility companies to build additional infrastructure. And when they did that, they then have the authority to demand, not just ask for, to demand that our power rates go up. And so that had a direct cause and effect relationship. Our utility bills went up because of the bill that she voted for. This idea that legislators should be telling the utility companies to spend money and then charging us for it is part of the problem. And that lack of responsibility that we have seen on the left, where any environmental excuse is good enough, has to end.
Senator Kelly?
Yeah, the fact of the matter is the utility companies do need to go before the Kansas Corporation Commission for any rate increase. That's who makes those decisions.
We're going to ask you to look once more at the monitor as we play an ad from the Laura Kelly campaign. So let's take a look at this ad.
When Sam Brownback slashed school funding with his tax experiment, he attacked what makes Kansas special. Kris Kobach supported Brownback's plan, and he actually says our schools are overfunded.
So our question goes to Laura Kelly first. Kris Kobach has denied, saying that he believes schools are overfunded, and we haven't found any evidence of a direct quote from him saying that. So do you stand by this statement in this ad?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Kris has made it very clear from the beginning of this campaign that he wants to take us back to the Brownback tax experiment. We know what that did. Sam Brownback made the largest cuts to schools in our state's history. That would happen again if we were to revert back to that particular policy. So yes, I absolutely stand by it. There's absolutely no way, or certainly hasn't told us, how he would fund our schools. He also was hypercritical of current Governor Jeff Collier, who did sign a bill to increase funding for schools. He made it very clear that he thought that was a major mistake and that he would not have done that if he had been governor.
I think Kris Kobach will want to respond, but we have a random order here, so next we go to Greg Orman.
Well, you know, I'm not going to get in between that fight there, but what I will say is, you know, my wife is a public school teacher, taught in the Turner School District in Kansas City, Kansas. My running mate, State Senator John Dahl, was a teacher and a coach for 20 years and in fact was the vice chair of the Education Committee in the Senate. We absolutely support public education in Kansas, and in fact I think we're the only campaign with a very detailed plan again to do that on our website. You know, but here we get to the point again where because of the Supreme Court's ruling and the spending we need to do on public schools, we're not going to have the resources to invest in our other priorities, which is why I've got a detailed plan to grow the Kansas economy, why I've outlined detailed ways that we can save money in our budget so that we're going to be able to invest in our priorities like career and technical education, like health care, like infrastructure, without having to raise taxes.
Kris Kobach?
You know, that ad is a perfect example of what's wrong with politics today. Politicians who will lie just to win office. You know, when she ran that ad, I saw that word overfunded. And I thought to myself, that's not a word I use. That's just not one of the words in my vocabulary. So we looked at the article she cited, and the article actually had a Kansas City Star reporter using the word overfunded. And he was referring to a debate in Atchison. So we got the transcript of the debate, and we read every word in the debate, and the word wasn't in there. So she's willing to lie, and we called her on it, and she's still running ads using the same words. You know, I've never said our schools are getting too much money. I've said, indeed, we should continue to increase funding for our schools. But the problem is we're not looking at where the money's going. I think we should put 75 cents of every dollar into classroom instruction, unlike the status quo, which Laura Kelly favors. If we did that, we would see teachers' salaries go up. We would see classroom materials being provided. You wouldn't have teachers having to buy materials out of their own pocket and bring them to class. Instead of spending so much money on lavish administration, extra redundant administrators, and big buildings. That's my plan.
Okay, and we want to take that debate on school funding a little further. The Kansas Supreme Court has ruled 3 times in 2 years that the state's spending on public schools is inadequate. The court gave until the end of the next legislative session to come up with a plan to provide more funding. So now, how specifically will you fix school funding, and how will you pay for it? Mr. Orman, we begin with you.
Well, I think what the Supreme Court said was the bill that was passed was sufficient provided it accounts for inflation. And I think we have the resources in our budget to address that right now. We won't have much left to do a lot of other things, which is, again, why I focused on growing the economy and making the state of Kansas more efficient. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit about ways we can do that right now. You know, look, we're engaged in a costly and expensive border war with Missouri right now. We spend money to take companies from their side of State Line Road to ours. They do the same thing. We looked at it. Hall Family Foundation said $301,000 for every net new job created. That's a waste of money. We can redirect those dollars to our other priorities. But the other thing that my wife said to me, who's a public school teacher, that really resonated is the best education policy is a growing economy. Because so much of what happens to a student and their educational outcomes happens outside the classroom. So if we can create great jobs for people so parents can be more involved in their kids' education, so kids don't have to work till 2 in the morning at a convenience store, we can lift everybody up.
Okay. Secretary Kobach.
We have a constitutional crisis going on right now in Kansas. The Kansas Supreme Court has seized the authority of the legislature to determine adequate spending amounts for education. They're the only Supreme Court in the nation that has done this. And I can say this as a former professor of constitutional law. Article 6, Section 6 of the Constitution that they point to has nothing in there that says that that this court can force an adequate amount of dollars to be spent for every child. Now, what we should be doing under my plan is, as we increase spending on education, let's ensure that instead of spending 53 cents of every dollar in the classroom, we're spending 75 cents of every dollar in the classroom. And then we'll see educational outcomes improved. You know, we've increased overall spending for 20 years, but we've seen our educational test scores flat. The second part of my plan is this. I want every school to be given a letter grade, A through F. And if any school increases its letter grade, say from a C to a B in any given year, then everybody in the building gets a raise. The teachers, the principal, the assistant principal, the coaches, the janitor. So everybody has a stake, a financial stake in improved performance.
Senator Kelly.
Yeah, I think that the Supreme Court ruling is actually evidence of the importance of keeping the 3 separate but equal branches of government. You know, to put in a constitutional amendment that would restrict the Supreme Court from overseeing what the legislature does and not being able to determine whether we're doing what we are constitutionally mandated to do is absurd on the face of it. They have been the check on a legislature that so many times has not done what they were supposed to do, which was to adequately fund our schools. Our schools are our largest economic driver in this entire state. It's not only important to our kids in the schools that they get the education, but it's important to our entire state that we have a quality education program going on if we want to be able to attract businesses, to keep businesses, and to be able to provide for those businesses the workers that they need.
Secretary Kobach, you wanted to follow up.
Yeah. When Senator Kelly says that we need to keep the 3 branches of government in balance, and this is evidence of that, that shows that she hasn't actually studied our constitutional structure. You know, when Alexander Hamilton wrote Federalist 78, he talked about the 3 branches of government, and he talked specifically about the judiciary. And he said, we need not fear the judiciary because it has neither the power of the sword nor the power of the purse. But in Kansas, we have turned Alexander Hamilton's words sideways, and the court has seized the power of the purse. It is your elected representatives who decide how much money to spend.
Greg Orman, 30 seconds.
Well, after the ACLU lawsuit, I don't know that I'd be relying too much on your legal expertise. I will say, however, the Kansans Can program has actually come up with a way to evaluate schools based on economic factors, et cetera, which will allow us to do a better job of evaluating kids. The other thing we haven't talked about, though, is if we really want to grow the Kansas economy, we've got to focus on workforce development. We've got to focus on not just how we fund education, but where we take kids. And that's why I've been very focused on pathways to career and technical education as a way to help grow the Kansas economy.
Kelly, did you want to follow up on this one? All right.
Okay, candidates, I want to talk now about public safety and crime. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation says statewide violent crime continues to trend upward as last year's murder rate was more than 40% higher than the 10-year average. Local and state agencies reported 176 murders in 2017. Of those, 120 involved guns. So I'm going to ask you to grade our state's gun laws using the traditional school grading system A through F, and then tell us what grade you would give the gun laws and why. We'll begin with Secretary Kobach.
I'd give Kansas an A- right now. I believe strongly in the right to keep and bear arms. We do have pretty good expansive rights for gun owners in Kansas. The idea that violent crime is increasing because we have the right to keep and bear arms is ridiculous. The bad guys, the lawbreakers, are going to break the law no matter what the law is. So to say that we law-abiding gun owners should have fewer rights because violent crime goes up is exactly wrong. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. We need the right to protect ourselves, and both of my opponents have said in the case of Greg Orman, or voted in the case of Laura Kelly, to restrict our gun rights. That's why Laura Kelly has an F from the NRA and I have an A+. They both want to restrict magazine capacity. They both want to limit our concealed carry rights. It is our concealed carry rights that protect us when the government is not there, because sometimes when a citizen is in trouble in a dark parking lot, on a dark campus, you can't get a police officer there in time. And our citizens need the right to protect ourselves. I will continue to protect our gun rights.
Senator Kelly, what grade would you give Kansas gun laws and why?
I would give Kansas gun laws a C at this particular point. You know, I've always been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment throughout my legislative career. But I also think that most Kansas gun owners in Kansas believe that we need to reinstate some common sense gun policy to ensure the safety of our kids, the safety in our schools, and the safety in our homes, and the safety in our streets. So as governor, what I plan to do is to bring together the stakeholders, bring together law enforcement, mental health professionals, public health professionals, educators, students, and parents, and bring them all together and work with them to form a comprehensive gun sense policy that makes sense for Kansas, that continues to ensure people's access, law-abiding citizens' access to guns, but also make sure that our kids and our schools are safe.
Mr. Orman.
You know, again, I think that our gun laws are roughly a C as well. I'm a gun owner. I support the Second Amendment. I support the right to keep and bear arms. But at the same time, I believe in reasonable firearm safety measures. You know, one of the things that I think we need to look at is the new concealed carry law that was passed. We had a good law. It required 8 hours of safety training to carry a concealed weapon. You know, today in Kansas, we require 1,000 hours of training to legally wax an eyebrow, and yet anybody can carry a concealed weapon now without a minute's worth of safety training. And I think that's a mistake. I also think we need to cover our background check system and close the loopholes there. You know, the people we catch in our background check system are people who have been dishonorably discharged from the military, have been judged to be mentally ill, have been sentenced to more than a year in prison, or have a domestic abuse restraining order against them. I don't want those people owning guns. So those are two things that I think we can do to make our gun laws more sensible and ultimately still protect and honor the Second Amendment.
I'm sorry we don't have time for rebuttal because we are running out of time, and we have time for one more question. We're asking the candidates to just keep it to 30 seconds, and we're going to do something a little bit different. Before we get to closing statements, we want to hear about a response not related to all the issues we've been talking about. I'm going to ask each of you to say something nice, if you're willing, about each of your opponents. I know. Take a breath. And we'll start with Senator Laura Kelly.
Well, thank you for that opportunity, Bob. I would say that Kris Kobach has one of the most adorable families I have ever seen. And I would say about Greg Orman that, you know, I actually worked on Greg's campaign in 2014 when he was running for the Senate. I thought he was eminently qualified for that position. And I continue to think that. And so.
All right, thanks. Greg Orman.
Well, you know, I'd echo what Senator Kelly said about Kris's family. One of the sweetest moments for me in this campaign was a parade in Gardner when I looked over and I saw my 3-year-old daughter playing with Kris's daughters, and it just reminded me of how much we really all have in common. I think Senator Kelly is a very intelligent, very thoughtful person, and I think she's someone who cares deeply about the state of Kansas.
Kris Kobach.
Thank you for the compliments on my family. I agree. I think Senator Kelly is one of the most experienced legislators in the Kansas Senate. I think she is one of the legislators who actually reads the bill and does some homework, and far too few people do that in the Kansas legislature. I think Greg Orman is actually someone who's got a wealth of experience, and he's very thoughtful as he approaches the issues. And I think his quest to sort of form some sort of identity outside of the parties, although I don't think it will succeed, I think it too is thoughtful.
Thank you.
Candidates, thank you very much. We want to give each of you now time for closing statements. You will each have 30 seconds, and for this we will start with our random draw order, beginning with Greg Orman.
Next Tuesday, Kansans have a choice. They can decide whether or not they want their decision to be made based on fear, based on a vote for a bad candidate to avoid a worse one, or if they want their decision to be made based on courage. They have a decision to make. Do we want Kansas to lead again? Do we want Kansas to set an example for the rest of the nation? Do we want Kansas to show our country a way out of the broken politics that have left so many Americans and so many Kansans behind? If you want that, I'm your candidate, and I humbly ask for your vote on November 6th.
Secretary Kobach.
I would ask you if you like the status quo in Kansas government. If you do like the status quo and think nothing should change, then you should vote for one of my 2 Democrat opponents. Because if they are elected, you will have 4 years of absolute gridlock. The Republican legislature will pass a bill and they will veto it. Pass a bill and veto it. If I'm elected, I will lead. And as you've heard tonight, I have many ideas that will take our state in a bold new direction, offer tax relief to Kansans. We will also stop giving away your money to illegal aliens, and we'll fight for things like term limits and things that will change the game completely in the state of Kansas.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you. You know, this is a really pivotal election for Kansas. The stakes have never been so high, and the choice has never been so clear. We can either go back to the Sam Brownback devastating years, or we can elect a governor who will work like the devil to rebuild our state. Kansas needs a strong, steady, experienced leader who can work from day one to get our state back on track. As your governor, I will do that. I'm Laura Kelly. I'm the only thing standing between Kris Kobach and the governor's office, and I ask for your vote on November 6th.
All right, and with that, we want to thank each of you for spending your time with us and sharing your perspectives and views with the Kansas voters. We hope you've been following along on social media tonight using the hashtag KSGovDebate. We're also posting updates to Facebook and to our websites this evening. You'll find more resources there about the election 1 week from today to help you make an informed decision. Make sure to tune in on election night for complete results. Thank you for watching. Good night.
The midterm elections, determining the control of Congress.